Hello, welcome. My name is Axel Wieder. I'm director of Bergen Kunsthal, and I have the pleasure to welcome you to this platform conversation happening as part of the exhibition The Ocean, which is currently on view still for another 1.5 weeks at Bergen Kunsthal. This event, Liquid Commons, Who Owns the Ocean, has been convened by the design and research studio INTERPRT, who contribute an important work in this exhibition downstairs. A work which consists mainly of two parts, a video and a large-scale diagram, who delve into the discourses around the speculative rush that's currently underway in the deep ocean to exploit seabed minerals that are allegedly needed for the green shift. And the group INTERPRT is working on an ongoing visual investigation on deep-sea mining. They cover specifically two aspects, the importance of deep-sea mining as one of the last remaining frontiers in capitalist exploitation and the risks that go hand in hand with this exploitation. We're happy to delve deeper into this topic here today. It's a very complex and topic, and there is already a lot to read in the exhibition. But we thought it's very important to actually give a chance to look deeper into this topic and understand more about the topic in general and specifically about the relevance of this topic here in Norway. I give a quick overview over the schedule that we have here for us today. The whole event will take around 1.5 hours, and we have first a couple of presentations by INTERPRT and guests. The first two contributions by Nabil Ahmed and Olga Lucko will describe the project by INTERPRT in more detail and their approach and the relevance of the topic, before we then, in a second part, go into the Norwegian side, starting with Sanden, and then the two guests, Pedro Ribeiro from the University of Bergen and Siri Carson, who's with us and who works in Trondheim. And we then finish with a panel conversation between all our speakers and the possibility to also ask questions from the audience. To introduce the speakers briefly, there will be more kind of introduction in the panel. INTERPRT is, as I mentioned, a research and design studio, which was founded in 2015, and INTERPRT works with civil society organizations, legal experts, journalists, and cultural institutions to produce evidence platforms and multimedia advocacy tools and exhibitions. And INTERPRT was initially affiliated in the UK, but have recently moved parts of the headquarters to Trondheim in Norway. And it was very exciting for us to actually work with INTERPRT here on this exhibition and to have this connection to a discussion that happens within the country. The first speaker, Nabil Ahmed, who's part of INTERPRT, one of the co-principals and a professor of visual intervention at the Trondheim Academy of Fine Arts, which is part of NTNU. Olga Lucko is also a co-principal of INTERPRT. She's an architect and leads INTERPRT's visual investigations. Sanden, who will introduce the second part, is a PhD candidate at the Trondheim Academy of Fine Arts at NTNU and working with INTERPRT on the ongoing visual investigation on deep-sea mining in Norway. Then our two guests, Siri Carson, as I mentioned, is director of NTNU Oceans and a professor of applied ethics at the Department of Philosophy and Religious Studies at NTNU. And Pedro Ribeiro, a researcher on deep-sea ecology here at the Department of Biological Science at the University of Bergen. And I heard you just came back from a field research, and we're looking very much forward to hear you all. Have fun, even though it's a very serious topic, but I'm really curious to hear more details about this important topic. Thank you so much for being with us today. And the event is live streamed. I should maybe say we have two cameras which are in the back. Don't look into the cameras if you don't want to be filmed. the film will be online available and afterwards also archived and accessible in the future. Thank you everybody so much for being here with us today. And yeah, are you all entering the stage at once? Okay, then I hand over to you. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Axel, so much for the introduction and for hosting the event. It's been a really a pleasure to sort of think through this topic with you, and exhibition making for us coming from art and architecture field is sometimes part of the process. So it's not only where something ends, but it's also where something begins or something gets articulated and worked out. And so in that sense, we're really happy to be able to present this work in the context of the ocean exhibition. So my role, well, you've heard from Axel a little bit about the plan of the day. My role today is mainly to lay out a little bit of some of the main arguments. So I will be sort of touching upon a number of different aspects of the project, and then we'll go into more detail through the intervention from the other speakers. So Axel already mentioned that that we're INTERPRT, and INTERPRT is a research and design studio that is based at the Trondheim Academy of Fine Arts at NTNU, but we're also very much working with various organizations on creating evidence for environmental destruction. So we have been working very closely for a number of years on a long-term research project that's been commissioned by the TBA 21 Academy to look at environmental destruction in the Pacific. So what makes researching and producing evidence for environmental destruction particularly challenging, right, is, for instance, unlike human rights violations and some conflict, environmental destruction sort of takes place over much longer periods, sometimes over very large spaces. And the destruction takes the form, let's say, of landscape changes, ecosystem loss, and various sort of kinds of destruction that may be very slow and difficult to perceive and to narrate and to demonstrate. And so the work that we do is very much focused on using architectural tools, spatial analysis, and other sort of methods to bring these issues not only to light, but also to produce kinds of evidence that could be used in a probative manner, so in a legal sort of context. So, so we do this work very much on the side of civil society, and we work with lawyers and NGOs worldwide. However, we've had very much of a focus on the Pacific and in the Pacific for a number of years, and this work began, for example, by working on one of the largest gold and copper mines in occupied West Papua in Indonesia. We've been supporting civil society groups, both inside West Papua and internationally, on using satellite imagery and maps and various kinds of tools to produce a record of the destruction of the mine, right? This work also involves doing advocacy work. A couple of years ago, we worked closely with the Office for Contemporary Art, OCA, Norway, to bring West Papuan indigenous leaders and activists that are fighting this mine to Tromsø to meet their Sami counterparts and to actually share stories and have these kind of conversations, right? So very recently, we also produced a project where we used thousands of pages of declassified French Defense Ministry documents and teamed up with a group of investigative journalists and scientists from Princeton University to reconstruct the impact of a series of nuclear weapons tests that took place in the Pacific in the 70s. So again, another parameter, right, of the difficulty and the challenges of representation of environmental violence involves this durational nature, along with, how they're widespread. So these issues are very much alive and kicking in the context of the deep ocean. While civil society advocacy groups such as ourselves were, of course, not the only ones to be using satellite images today, at least satellite imagery data is, you can find freely available good resolution satellite data going back decades. But when it comes to, let's say, the deep ocean, and this is something that we will, of course, hear more about today, much more difficult to grab. Just in a few words, what is deep-sea mining? It is, in the context of the climate emergency, it is being put forward, as Axel mentioned, as a magic bullet of sorts, right, to deal with, let's say, the green shift. The world will need many batteries to run electric cars and so on to sort of decarbonize the economy, and apparently these metals can be found easily from the deep sea. So, but there's one problem. A vast volume of water that's keeping from the mining companies from getting there, right? And so, so the organization, so there's essentially two kinds of environments, right, where these minerals will be, and there's different types of them, that two kinds of regimes that sort of control this, right? And this is where sort of politics enters a little bit. One of them are the minerals that are within the EEZ of each sort of country. So Norway has a massive EEZ, for instance, and that is the prerogative or the choices, of the government. But there's also the international sea, which is a strange place because it's a place where, supposedly anarchy rules, but in the international sea, the UN has set up a body called the International Seabed Authority, which is supposed to regulate, right, where the minerals that are in the international sea can possibly be explored and exploited. So we have a certain definition of the ocean, right, as regulated by laws. But then on the other hand, there are very much other conceptions of the ocean. For example, in the Pacific, where we've worked for many years, right, where communities in the Pacific, the many island communities there, do not understand, the sea as a separate, where divisions can be placed. In fact, the ocean is something that is indivisible in that sense, the global ocean. So there's almost these two conflicts, right? And in a way, this comes to the idea of the liquid commons. It's the greatest commons that we have. However, it is simultaneously the deepest frontier. And one of the key sort of issues around deep sea mining, right, is apparently, right, or very clearly, a huge knowledge gap that exists. We don't know how fast we can get to the minerals. We don't know if they will be possible to get them out. We have very little idea about the ecosystems, and the list goes on. However, the situation we have here, right, is that on the other hand, we have the tiny country of Nauru. So a question, right? What does Nauru and Norway have in common? Arguably not much, but then on the other hand, plenty in this context, because Nauru is a country that had many phosphates and minerals, and it was mined to smithereens. The place looks like a lunar sort of landscape now. There's only 12,000 people. It's a tiny island in the Pacific. However, it has been able to trigger a very special rule at the International Seabed Authority, which says that Nauru, regardless of whether the regulations are in place or not, may be allowed to mine its claim in the International Seabed area, right, in the Pacific, called the Clarion Clipperton Zone. There's one catch, which is that in Nauru, the mining body of Nauru is in fact wholly owned by a private company that's based in Canada. So here begins a set of questions and conflicts, right? So on the other hand, as we will hear, Norway has began to open up the process for mining to potentially take place in the Norwegian continental shelf. Also, strangely enough, around this 2-year timeline. And so there becomes there comes the commonality, right? And in our exhibition, we've sort of opened up this process to explore these bureaucratic systems and the consultation process that is involved in moving things forward. But what we've done on the Pacific side is, in fact, use the best science possible, working with our colleagues, the Deepsea Mining campaign, in particular, to produce an animation, right, a multimedia advocacy tool that actually looks at how, what might be the impacts in the Pacific from mining. So we are, of course, environmental conflicts require many disciplines to collaborate, right? However, what we can do in coming from the field of architecture is able to bring together, in a spatial context, different sort of data and into a 3D environment, and be able to sort of zoom in and take you and walk you through these spaces, right? So where we can sort of reimagine these spaces as spaces of evidence and accountability. And I'd like to sort of end on that note around what I feel is that one of the central points is why we're assembled here together, is that that knowledge gap that I spoke about, and that is not unique to the deep ocean. When mining companies or oil companies go, or get involved in human rights abuses or exploit minerals, let's say in Amazonia or in Ogoniland in Africa and so on, we sometimes don't see what happens. These places are far away. But so what that does, in a way, is also creates what we might call an impunity gap or an accountability gap, right? Where the lack of knowledge is almost can be used as a space where new kinds of exploitation can take place, right? So in a way, our role as a civil society is to being part of civil society is to use the tools that we have, which might be as diverse as artistic research to a deep engagement with various kinds of science, and rooted in the field of, let's say, sort of spatial ways of looking at and understanding the world, we believe can be a powerful way to visualize and reimagine these spaces of conflict. So sort of would like to kind of end there with my sort of laying out some of these sort of main ideas. And we want to now walk you through a little bit the project that we've done in the Pacific that's in the exhibition, which looks at how to use spatial tools to produce a simulation of the potential environmental destruction that could very well happen if deep sea mining continues or is allowed to take place. So these are big questions that are being asked, and it's no less than the fate of the planet and the ocean that's at stake. But we feel that this work that we're doing can contribute to better understanding and intervention. So I want to hand over the space to Olga Lucko, who is a co-principal at INTERPRT, and to hear from her about this aspect of our work.
So I'm going to kind of go through the slides in kind of looking at challenges and then also showing what was our approach challenge to these challenges of representation. So focus of our visual investigation was Deepsea Mining in Clarion Clipperton Zone. If or when it goes ahead, it will be one of the largest mining operations in the world, covering more than 2 million square kilometers, which is equals roughly around 5 Norways. It is located in the Pacific Ocean between Hawaii and Mexico. And the resources that targeted here are polymetallic nodules that are like potato-sized formations containing metals such as manganese, nickel, copper, and cobalt and copper. So the scale was one of the very first challenges they had to address. The size of Clarion Clipperton Zone spans several thousand kilometers. Even when looking at a scale of one mining block, the depth, as shown on this drawing, the depth of the ocean, which is on average about 5 kilometers deep, looks almost flat. So our approach was first to find a specific site we want to investigate instead of looking on the entire Clarion Clipperton Zone. The contract areas of Nauru Ocean Resources, which is fully owned by metal companies, which Nabil already mentioned about, become our main interest. In particular, the mining block called Noridi. Because this is where Deep Green, that is now called Metals Company, has done the majority of their studies to quantify the resources and to use that as a basis for attracting the investment. And I think, if Nabil hasn't mentioned that, they recently triggered a 2-year rule to start mining exploitation, even if the ISA do not produce the final regulations. So if mining takes place in Clarion Clipperton Zone, Noridi is most likely to be one of the first places where it all can begin. So looking at the Noridi, it is still a very large area. It's about 26,000 square kilometers, which is slightly less than the size of Belgium. So we still needed to kind of narrow down and to understand the scale of the size we can work with. So we looked at the time scale of mining and found that in 1 year of mining, approximately 20 by 20 kilometer plot could be covered. So that was the more realistic size to work with in 3D model and bring all the necessary data into it. So infrastructure, mining infrastructure, especially nodule collecting machines, do not exist yet. So that was a challenge, how to architecturally represent the mining operation. There are only some few nodule collector prototypes that have been tested so far. However, there are many hyper-realistic visualizations by industry that show the deep ocean as an empty environment devoid of any life, arguably using it as a tool to downplay the impact of deep sea mining. Here's a computer visualization made by a world-famous architect firm called Bjarke Ingels Group. And they produced this animation for the metals company marketing video. So to counter this visual greenwashing, our investigation used architectural tools to visualize what is known and to show the environmental impact from full-scale mining. So first, we analyzed what is known about technical and economical factors, such as engineering, estimates and knowledge in the field, and nodule abundance in Norway, to understand how big area and what rate it will require to do mining in order to make it a profitable operation. We calculated that the rate, speed, and movement of 4 collectors moving in tandem on the seabed, and found that over approximately 1 year, the area that is 400 square kilometers of the seafloor could be destroyed. And ultimately, we wanted to understand what will be the scale of mining if entire Clarion Clipperton Zone will be mined for 20 years by all 16 mining contractors. So juxtaposition of mining on land versus mining on seabed is often used to downplay environmental harm that it would produce. It is often argued that losing wildlife on land is much worse than destroying life on the seabed, as most of it is just more simple animals or some bacteria. We decided to avoid this route of comparing these two completely different ecologies, or trying to statistically quantify the biomass and justify destruction on seabed. So instead, we wanted to bring the deep sea environment into our model and use architectural tools to reveal what is really at stake. So we were very lucky to acquire the megafauna photographic survey of 88,000 images collected from API-6. APIs is the areas allocated for marine protection in Clarion Clipperton Zone. So here on the left, where these yellow zigzag lines, they are the AUV camera paths that the data were collected in 3 different landscapes that represents general characteristic of abyssal plains where nodules are found. So the image data we get had all the metadata, so we were able to geolocate the images into our bathymetric model. So our statistical analysis of one single track, 2 kilometer long, showed that approximately 2 kilometer by 1.6 meters wide. So that track, all the images on that track, approximately 49% identified as containing 1 or more megafauna. So we analyzed altogether 10,000 photographs. So based on this one track, we randomly distributed image areas to scale in order to bring megafauna species data in our experimental mining simulation model. So just to clarify that here the yellow squares don't represent life, but they represent the area where it was detected. We also brought the mining infrastructure into this model to show the mining operation within this environment. So our 3D visualization of mining perhaps visually is less realistic and more diagrammatic, but it attempts to represent the environment of the deep sea based on the data and the knowledge rather than imagination. So this potentially is one of the greatest challenges that could seriously impact the visual investigation. It is a lack of data. Although our site is not ready, there is no publicly available data for this site. There are some reports where you can find information such you can see on the screen. This is a bathymetry and sampling station at NORID site, but this is just an image rather than actual data. And another challenge is an issue is with the publicly available data, its resolution. Here, this is a model generated from GEPCO data, Global Terrain Model of Ocean and Land. And it's so coarse resolution, so you get really extreme results that are just not usable. There is other types of bathymetric mapping that exist, but it's not available for entire seabed, and it's often hard to acquire because it's done by different organizations. So to address this limitation, here just wanted to demonstrate all the data, locations of all the data we brought to NORID. We aim to stay within Clarion and Clipperton Zone, so to be as accurate as possible to the environment of this place. Another major gap in knowledge and data when it comes to seabed mining, it is impact. In order to show this full-scale impact, we needed to simulate the plume that mining will create. This image shows how small AV camera just gently touched the surface of the seafloor, created a massive plume. The seafloor is very fragile. It is often described as a soup-like substance, where most of the life inhabits just top layer of the sediment. You can only just imagine what the impact will be from the giant mining machines moving on the seafloor. So 2 sediments plume will occur from the mining process. One will be due to collection of the nodules in the seabed, and another due to discharge tailings from the cleaning the nodules above the processing vessel. So to simulate these plumes, we collaborated with physical oceanographer John Lewis to conduct trace studies of an area covering 200,000 square kilometers using open drift particle trajectory modeling software developed by Norwegian Meteorological Institute. Open drift follows vertical particles, virtual tracers particles representing plume as they travel in accordance with the flow of ocean currents. Here is our simulation of the collector plume for 30-day period that revealed that the particles can travel over 200 kilometers away from the lease point and far beyond the mining block. This is another example on which I'll finish. It's a mid-water plume, or also called outfall plume. So the tailing discharge. So we brought this to another site belongs to metals company area within Tonga concession area. And we released virtual particles at 1,000 meters, and you can just see the impact that can spread 1,000 kilometers away from the source. And this is the water column that inhabit with free-swimming species such as sharks, whales, and tuna, and one can just imagine what potential impacts of full-scale mining can be. That's it. Maria, yeah, next.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Nice to see you. Okay, I'll just see if I can put up my talk. Great. So I'm going to introduce us into the second part of our talk. I'm very pleased that we have with us 2 guests here today, with Siri Carson and with Pedro Ribeiro. I'll make a quick introduction to the political context that has happened in Norway, known as the opening process. Then I will pass the word on to Pedro, who can tell us more about the deep sea ecology, what we know and what we don't know. followed by Siri, who will speak about the ethics of deep-sea mining. And then we will end with a panel discussion. But before I go into the political process, I'll make a very quick overview so that it's easier for you to kind of follow also the issue with the two-year deadline. I just would like to share with you why, or what I believe artists and architects can contribute with, and why we should engage in this topic. I got a question from a journalist who asked me, why do you work with deep-sea mining? And I see two reasons for why I should engage. One thing is that I think it's important that we make the process accessible for the general public, so that we are aware of what is going on, and therefore we can help supporting an informed debate about deep-sea mining. And the other aspect I think is important is to engage in what has been called the green shift. And I don't know if you've seen it, but the European Commission has called upon artists, designers, and architecture to contribute in promoting the Green Deal by making it visible, tangible, and sensible for people. And I believe that what we're doing now with deep-sea mining is also to understand that it's important to contribute to a critical understanding of the steady representation of the green shift. One thing is the challenge of representations of the areas that humans can't see or feel, such as the deep sea, and then we have to trust the images that we are shown. But it can also be about trying to make visible the politics behind the policies and the funding schemes that are driving the green shift. So I believe that sustainability requires accountability. So I'll go quickly into what's going on in Norway. So we are, as I said, in the middle of an opening process for deep-sea mining. Here is the proposed area for further investigation for potential exploration licenses for deep-sea mining. It has been initiated by the previous government, Solberg government, and it's carried out by the Ministry of Petroleum. So the opening process consists of 4 stages. I see that I have my microphone, so I can't move up, sorry. I'll try to stay stable, but and we've tried to visualize this process downstairs in the room that we have our installation. Our work has focused on the program part here. It is a proposal that was sent out where the government was sending this out to the civil society for input. So the aim of the process is to reach a decision in 2023 on whether to open up for deep-sea mining exploration on the Norwegian continental shelf. The government has sent out the proposal for the program to the stakeholders in Norway. They received 53 responses from ministries, government agencies, county municipalities, state administrators, research institutions, companies, and interest groups. All of those responses are available on the website. So what we did in our installations downstairs is that we read through all of them and we grouped them according to the reoccurring arguments. And we translated the arguments that was brought up into questions, and we placed the responses on a scale of agree, neutral, and disagree to be able to offer like a rough overview of the process and the different positions that was brought forth. And there are different positions towards whether this is a good idea at all, and whether the opening process is moving too fast. And some of the main concerns is that the deadline of 2023 is too soon. And there's a need for much more research on the fauna of the deep sea and the role that those ecosystems have on other ecosystems in the ocean. Another controversial argument stated by the government and many actors is that we need the minerals for the green shift. But this is, however, not entirely clear, as experts such as the Norwegian Geological Survey has criticized the government for being one-sided and biased in their description of the need of these minerals. Nevertheless, the government has approved the plan as they proposed a couple of weeks ago. I don't know if you've seen it in the news. But the next public hearing about the actual decision for opening up for deep-sea mining exploration will be in July next year. And in principle, everyone can send in their response. So we're very happy to have with us our guests. I'll give a short bio introduction, and then I will give the word to Pedro. So Pedro Ribeiro is a researcher in deep-sea ecology at the Department of Biological Sciences in the University of Bergen. Ribeiro is the principal investigator in the research projects EcoSafe Ridge Mining, environmental risk studies towards sustainable seabed mineral mining on the mid-ocean ridge in Norway, and Ridge Ecology, deep ecosystems in Norwegian waters and knowledge gaps and challenges related to the deep-sea mining. So we're very happy that you can come and also explain more to us about the deep-sea ecology. And then we will follow by Siri. Siri Granum Carson is the director of NTNU Oceans, a transdisciplinary strategic research area at NTNU, the Norwegian University of Science and Technology. She is a professor of applied ethics at the Department of Philosophy and Religious Studies at NTNU. And her main research area are corporate social responsibility and responsible innovation. She is also project leader for Afino, a network project for responsible research and innovation in Norway. Thank you so much. I'll give the word to you, Pedro.
Try to find my presentation. Yeah. Yeah. Hello, everyone. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you to INTERPRT for inviting me to this event. Thank you, Nabil, for contacting me, the whole team. I'm very happy to be here and very happy to see another aspect of approaching this matter of deep-sea mining, not just from the scientific side, for the industry side, but also from other areas of thinking and other areas of creativity areas, and also from society. I think society has a very important role in this topic and should very definitely be informed about every aspect related to deep-sea mining and informed about possible consequences of engaging into deep-sea mining industry, consequences for the deep sea and global consequences. I will give a very brief talk about our state of knowledge regarding the Arctic deep-sea ecosystems, so focusing more in the context of the Norwegian scenario, not so much on the CCZ, but some of the issues are very common, as you will see. We are talking about the Norwegian continental shelf under 200 meters depth, so 200 meters down to 5,500 meters. This is the maximum depth that we can find on the Malloy Deep, which is up here. It is a very diversified area of seafloor. It's dominated by a very long mountain range, which we call the Arctic mid-ocean ridge. This is formed by plate tectonics. So the North American plate and the Eurasian plate are diverging. And this is where the seafloor is created. And in this process, there's also a range of mountains that is created. So this gives origin to a very diverse landscape and to a variety of habitats. It's a huge area, and despite recent technological developments, only parts of it have been mapped with good detail. So we have bathymetry maps with very coarse resolution, and only very, very limited areas have been mapped in detail to, well, it can be down to centimeters, actually, the spatial resolution, but it's usually a couple of meters. As Marie already showed, the Norwegian continental shelf also hosts mineral resources. These are still being surveyed. These are, what I'm showing here in this map, are
potential areas for prospection. We have two types of mineral resources. We have polymetallic sulfides. These are formed by hydrothermal activity, and they occur in the vicinity of hydrothermal systems, so it's these hot springs that are along the ridge axis. And also manganese crusts, polymetallic crusts. And these are formed by precipitation of minerals on seamounts, on the seabed. So this is a process that takes millions of years. They are also very hard to detect. Essentially, what we do is look at bathymetry maps, identify potential areas where these deposits may occur, and then you need a whole survey to go there and actually verify their existence. So not just for biology, but also for geological research, deep sea research is an area that requires a huge amount of resources. It's very expensive. It's not something that can be done as in other areas of the globe. And therefore, there's a lot of investment going on, trying to understand if these mineral deposits exist, and what is the size of these mineral deposits, and what is the ore grade, so if they are commercially viable, if they are attractive. In this area, and this is my main point, we also have diverse habitats. We have hydrothermal vents that you can see here, so they have these very, very big chimneys expelling fluid, hot fluid that is rich in minerals, and this gives rise to an endemic community of fauna that can only live associated with these habitats. You can also find sponge grounds. So these are areas of the seafloor that has a very dense community formed by sponges and associated fauna. So these are hotspots of biodiversity on the seafloor. And you have other areas of high diversity on the seafloor. This is just to give a few examples. Of course, some habitats are more common than others. Some of them, like hydrothermal vents, they are usually not much bigger than this room, and they are interspersed by tens or hundreds of kilometers. So these are very, very rare, very special habitats. They are very hard to find, so the initial stage is to try to sniff the plume that comes out of the chimney, so vessel-based or AUV-based surveys, and then we need to go down there and see with our own eyes if these habitats exist. So these are obviously highly vulnerable to any kind of impact because they are so small. Our current knowledge of the deep sea ecosystems, let's say it's more advanced in some areas than others. For instance, we have a lot of sampling done, but what we are still doing is analyzing these samples to be able to understand, for instance, which species are living on the Norwegian continental shelf. This is not an easy question because we can do it in two ways. We can use video surveys to film the communities on the seafloor, film the fauna. This animal that you are looking at here is probably 2 centimeters. It's not more than that. This snail is probably 1 centimeter long. So what you can see from video does not tell you what species this is. So what we need to do is sample. We need to collect them, and we need to send them to taxonomic experts so that they can spend sometimes a huge amount of time to identify, to see if it's a new species and to see how it fits into the species that we already know. So we really need to understand the biodiversity of the locations. And this is not something that can be done instantaneously just by looking at the animals that live there. Another very important question is how the different species are associated. How do they interact among themselves? Are some species depending on each other? So for instance, if one species is very vulnerable to disturbance, how does it affect the whole community? So these are studies that need to be done sometimes using manipulation, using experiments. And in the deep sea, we start by doing a full assessment of the composition of a certain community. In this case, it's again a sponge ground, so which species lives there, in what abundance, and if there is any correlation between the occurrence of one species or the other species. Again, I'm going through increasing levels of lack of knowledge in these research questions. We know even less how the environment influences biological communities. How is this important? Well, if we assume that there will be a disturbance on the seafloor, we need to understand how this will impact the species that lives there. So we need to know what is the relationship between the environment and the biology, and how the environment varies naturally needs to be investigated. So this takes a few years to understand the natural variability of the ecosystems. And this, again, requires technology, requires instruments, requires benthic observatories to be left there for a few years. In the same line of research, we also try to understand how ecosystems are functioning. So how do they produce biomass? How do they generate the community's biodiversity? How do these fluctuate in time? How do species interfere with the cycling of nutrients in the deep sea? And how does the variation in the cycling of nutrients can influence the persistence of species? In this case, we are using this is research by UIB, just using a respiration chamber on sponges, just to understand what is the respiration rate of sponges. And this is something that is, for deep sea mining, is incredibly important to understand what changes in the environment can imply in terms of the persistence of these very important communities. A very important research question was addressed already here before. What are the potential environmental pressures caused by deep sea mining? The most obvious, habitat removal, the effect of mining plumes, but we don't know how large they will be, if there will be mining plumes. We need to have access to what the industry is planning to do for the mining operations. We also need to understand what is the impact of light and noise on the seafloor. This has not been quantified, and we don't even know what kind of mining operations we can expect in this area. Another very important research question is, if we go ahead with deep sea mining, will the ecosystems be able to recover, and how? So for this, we need to understand a variety of biological processes. This is a very nice scheme. I forgot to give the credit here. This is a paper by Shank, Tim Shank, 2015. And it shows very simply how biological processes such as reproduction, larval dispersal, and settlement of larvae from one location can influence the persistence of communities on another location. We do these studies sometimes using genetics. So we need to collect the samples, we need to conduct genetic studies, and we need to assess the genetic proximity of the different populations to be able to understand if we can have the supply of individuals from undisturbed locations to areas that were disturbed so that we can have recovery. So my final slide, and I think these are the most important take-home messages from my perspective. We don't know what the potential environmental impacts of this deep sea mining will be, and this applies not only for the Norwegian continental shelf, it applies to other areas of the globe. We definitely need a more solid understanding of deep sea ecosystems on the Norwegian Sea, and these studies cannot be done until 2023. Some of them take more time, some of them will require a few more years to be implemented and to obtain data that is relevant to give a solid knowledge-based answer regarding possible impacts of deep sea mining. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's see if I can find my slides somewhere here. Here it is. All right. Thank you so much to Mari and Nabil for inviting me to this very interesting seminar and for showing me their very interesting exhibition as part of this ocean exhibition. I hope you all had a chance to check it out. Otherwise, I understand it's still open afterwards. So, as was said, I'm a director for NTNU Oceans, which means that I try to, or we work to create more activities across the disciplines, make things happen that's interesting and new within ocean research by connecting the dots. Some of our main dots you see on this slide here with some of our sort of focus points in our research area, which is everything, which are all connected. You see this one circle where it says Blue Arts and Humanities, which this project that is presented here fits very well into, and I'm particularly proud of this part of the research area, which is also very important, I think, to create connections between what's happening in Blue Arts and Humanities with the other, some of the more technology-dominated areas of ocean research at NTNU, one of which is the one you see in the bottom, where it says sustainable resource utilization in the ocean space, energy and minerals. And as we've already heard, deep-sea mining is something that is being explored or thought about as a potential new development. We started up a so-called pilot program in deep-sea mining at NTNU as part of NTNU Oceans in 2014, looking into different ways of trying to answer, can we mine the ocean floor? But also, as a very important part, should we? So this slide here shows a PhD thesis that I was supervisor for by Espen Stabel, that looks into the normative questions, the environmental ethical questions in consideration with deep-sea mining. So we heard a little bit about the background, climate change, and the green shift that we need to do, and how deep-sea mining might be a source of minerals needed for this green shift. The ocean is impacted by climate change. It's also seen as a source of climate change mitigation. This slide here by the high-level panel for sustainable ocean development looks at some ways the ocean can be a source of climate change mitigation. Doesn't mention deep-sea mining as a potential source for climate change mitigation, as it concludes that it's at the too early stage. Because we might get minerals that could ease the transition, but it's also the case that this could seriously damage or harm some ecosystems at the ocean floor, which is, of course, something that we have to balance and we have to solve these the challenges associated with climate and nature habitats at the same time. Otherwise, we won't solve any of them. The ocean is seen as a source to solve a lot of issues. And what's important in this sense, I mean, we look to the ocean to increase food production, energy production, marine transportation or maritime transportation, and minerals exploitation. And it's important that we are able to have a holistic evaluation of all these different impacts on the ocean. I think the last presentation also pointed to very much to the need to find independent and trustworthy information about the ecosystems. I think one research ethical challenge with the situation we are in now is that what is driving the exploration of the ocean floor is, in the end, the wish or the dream about exploitation, and who are actually financing and who are driving this research agenda. That might also impact to what extent the information we need is being produced in a neutral way. We are producing new knowledge and technology, and it's important that we are making sure that it's not all driven by deep sea mining interests, but that we also secure free and available information so that everyone can contribute to take a stand to this. Responsible research and innovation is about anticipating and reflecting on the outcome of research and innovation. This is about trying to aim for this kind of inclusive and reflective and unbiased knowledge so that we can try to evaluate whether a technological development is leading in the right direction. We cannot first develop the technology and then see if this is something that has good or bad impact. We need to do that assessment before, during, and after the knowledge and technology development. This is based normatively in a way of thinking that was introduced, among others, by Hans Jonas, a German philosopher, who addressed the way we have developed technology to an extent that it's able to destroy our planet. And therefore, we need to kind of reform our values and ethics also to this new situation. And we need to me, this also calls for work across disciplines and sectors and need to include all stakeholders in the process. And that's why I think these kinds of projects are extremely important. Hans Jonas talks about the heuristic of fear, which means that fear should guide us to responsible research and innovation. We should think about what is the worst thing that could happen, and we are all responsible for gathering as much knowledge as possible about the distant effects before taking action. And are we really doing that in this case? In other words, he was one of the first one to formulate something like the precautionary principle, which is being mentioned a lot in connection with deep sea mining, but we need to, of course, because it can be, how do you really implement such a principle? It's an ethical or normative principle for decision-making under uncertainty, and it's something that should guide us in increasing our knowledge base without all the time necessarily pushing the exploitation agenda. It's a kind of a paradox in the fact that we are learning so much about the deep ocean floor now. It's so much exciting. We saw some pictures in the last presentation. I'm just picking up some of them here as well to kind of... it's in a sense a paradox that once we start endangering something, because we are exploring it with a kind of aim to exploit it, and on the way towards that we are learning to appreciate them and love the ecosystems that are down there, and hopefully it will guide us to make good decisions in the coming years. So to sum up very briefly, I would say that an ethical approach to deep sea mining is something that demands a strong concept of sustainability, which means that ecological concerns have to be seen as more fundamental than economic. It's about, because we cannot have a function in economics, we cannot have a sustainable economic system if it's not based on ecological concerns. It has to be based on a robust understanding of the precautionary principle. It has to include stakeholders at levels in the discussion, and it has to also take into consideration all the relevant facts. I think we see in the case of deep sea mining that there are a lot of different relevant facts, and if you bring up some of them, that might give a very skewed image of what's actually at stake. So we need to have a holistic interpretation of these facts, but that's not enough. We have to set these facts into a framework where we also discuss what values should drive the development here, and also we need to be in contact with our emotions. We need to see, okay, what is at stake here? And I think art has an extremely important role to play in this context. So, thank you. Should I just be seated? Yeah, you come.
Let's see.
Can I just close it? Maybe?
Yeah? Okay.
Just put up the other.
Great. Then we'll move on to the panel. I have some questions for you all, but I would also love if the audience, if you have any questions, and we can have a discussion with all of us. I might kick off, though. I was fascinated, Siri, with your kind of fear of the worst. And I wanted to ask you, Pedro, about impact. So maybe kind of driven a little bit, inspired by your what is the worst scenario, could you speak a little bit about what you see as possible, the possible scale of impact from deep sea mining, and how wide could the effect be, and what kind of effects do you see can happen to the different ecosystem? Almost also thinking, what could the worst be, if that's possible to speak of now?
Well, yeah, I'll do my best, even though I prefer to speak based on facts.
Yeah.
And what happens is that we do not have facts to base our opinion. So my opinion is that the main impact from mining will come from the plume, because it's a far-reaching, potentially far-reaching impact. Of course, what interferes in the magnitude of such impact will be variables that we don't know. The density of the plume, how many metals, what is the concentration of toxic materials that the plume will carry. The pattern of the ocean currents on the deep sea floor is not even very well studied. So I was looking at this simulation that Olga presented, and I think that in a way you presented a very worst case scenario in which you can have dispersal of plumes, dispersal of sediment over several months, assuming that the sediment will not settle. I think that many of the finer particles may travel a long distance, and depending on the concentration of these finer particles, we can have serious impacts on the benthic fauna, especially on the species that are filter feeders, so they feed on particles that fall from the water column. But we can also have impacts on the water column. We can have impacts, for instance, on the pelagic fish. We can have increased mortality from larvae because they are extremely sensitive. They are more sensitive than adults. So we can have disruption of fish stocks. I mean, we can not speculate, but we can predict on and on and on. But I think at this point it's very, very difficult to put boundaries on this. And this is one of the exercises that needs to be done, is to simulate distribution, the dispersal of plumes, and then associated with impacts caused by toxicity of metals. This would give us already a very good idea of far-reaching impacts. And of course, what are the effects on the whole region, on the whole ecosystem of the Nordic Seas if we remove habitat at certain areas? So how will this influence what we call connectivity? So it's the degree to which populations of organisms living in different areas are interrelated. So I think this would be the points to address that are, for me, more important.
Thank you.
I could maybe ask a specific question relating to that. We hear sometimes that the difference between extinct vents and vents that are still alive, so as to speak. And one of the narratives that comes from the mining industry, right, is that, well, we will only go for the extinct vents. Does that mean that marine life would not be affected, or as much?
Well, extinct vents, the deposits that are remaining in the extinct vents, we assume that there is no chance for the vents to become active again. So, you know, the definition of what is extinct and inactive is a bit fluid. My personal view is that inactive vents can reactivate, so they are still close to the active vents. So they are still in the vicinity of the heat source. Whereas extinct vents, we can assume that given the distance, as the seafloor spreads away from the ridge axis, the distance is already far enough that we assume that those vents, those deposits, are too far away from a heat source. So in a way, if we drill, or if the industry drills on these extinct deposits, perhaps the distance is too far away to affect the active vents, but there are other ecosystems in the deep sea. It's not just the active vents. I showed in my presentation, I actually had a very short clip to show, but I ran out of time. There's other ecosystems, there's high biodiversity, not just on active vents. And if we are drilling in areas, for instance, that are close to a seamount, or if we are extracting manganese crust from a seamount, what is the magnitude of the impact? What area around these explorations would be affected? It would surely impact marine life.
Thank you. And going back to the deadline of 2023, I would wonder, if there was no such deadline, how much time do you think you would need to research these areas and answer these questions?
Well, it's a matter of the available resources, really. I think technology is evolving in a spectacular way. So we are transitioning from having to go out on research cruises every year, and it's usually in summer because that's where the weather allows us, and concentrate all our studies in one research cruise or two research cruises, so a very limited time, to the possibility of deploying technology on the seafloor that can continuously observe the seafloor, collect data related to ecological variables, environmental variables, in a continuous way, not just once a year. Depending on how variable the seafloor, those areas of seafloor are, this would determine how many years we would need to have a clear picture of the natural variability of the environment. So this is one point. The other point is, of course, experiments take a lot of resources, take a lot of time. Studies of biodiversity take specialized work by scientists. What I can say is that 2023 is too short, but I cannot put a time on how long it would take to know everything. I would say if we had 5 to 10 years, could be. We are also talking about areas, very extensive areas of seafloor that need to be mapped, and all of this takes time and resources.
Yeah, it was just to comment on that, because I mean, in 2 years, it's not being opened up for any kind of exploitation. It's only sort of when they will start exploring. So it goes into another phase. But couldn't that also be give opportunities to do even more thorough research of the things that you are mentioning that we need to find out about? And it was discussed. Several of us were at the conference this week where it was discussed, this opening up process versus a moratorium, which was also on the table. And an argument was that, well, a moratorium could very easily effectively stop the kind of research that is going on, and we are gathering maybe not fast enough, but we are gathering a lot of new knowledge, which will help us hopefully make the right decisions. And a moratorium might just freeze the whole process. What's your view from your perspective on this?
I agree. I think exploration can be a very good thing for research, for scientific research. It can boost research programs on fundamental research and applied ecological research. But there is one aspect that I think needs to be looked into carefully, which is what is the impact of exploration? What does it entail? Exploring for deposits, trying to get samples from deposits, testing equipment, testing machinery. So I think these activities should be regulated, and they should be done in parallel with the environmental study.
I mean, one comment to that is that things have been moving forward in the CCZ much before the Norwegian continental shelf. And the report that we get from what has been happening there is not necessarily good for the ocean, because the exploration licenses were given out some time ago. And while it has advanced scientific knowledge of the site, it has really pushed forward the exploitation agenda as well, right? So I mean, in that sense, I think it's, I guess it's a question is that, I mean, we have the two sites up on, diagrammatically up on there, like, also like what can we learn from what are the mistakes, or I'll put that in quotation marks, right, taking place in the international waters, and how does Norway's role kind of then, as a leading energy producer, have an impact then on those international processes, right?
Yeah, I forgot what I really wanted to say, because now I heard the last thing you said about Norway's role. I think that's an important question to ask, and I think what is driving some of the agenda in Norway is, of course, this: what are we gonna do after when we have to turn stop drilling for oils? What about all the technology and all the knowledge, all the expertise that we have? How can that maybe be transferred into something like this? Can we actually maybe contribute to doing, if this is to be done, that is being done in the best possible way? So I guess the story would be, at least from Norway's side, is that we have some important competence and knowledge that could be applied here. But what I really wanted to say is that I think the success criteria and the potential to learn from the different developments that's going on is transparency, and which is really something that is we need to push for. It's difficult because the research is partly being driven by commercial interests, and not all data that is being developed is openly available, which makes it very difficult to take good governmental decisions or governance decisions for the future. So pushing this transparency and data sharing agenda even harder than it's being done today, I think is very important.
Is there any questions from you guys? Yeah? You can start with you.
Sorry.
Okay.
Quickly ask to use the microphone.
I can use the microphone, yes, definitely. Hello, I'm Edvard Widding. I'm an anthropologist at University of Bergen. But I also work from time to time on the floor of the UN as an advisor to the Pacific countries of Fiji, Palau, and Solomon Islands. And I think one dimension of the discussion which I'd like to put to the panel is something that does not belong to my own discipline, social anthropology, but rather belongs to the legal dimension. And goes back to the original question of today's event: who owns the ocean? Who owns the ocean? We have to go back then to the United Nations Convention of the Law of the Sea, we have to be aware of the particular dimension of connectivity and add to that another dimension, namely adjacency. Where connectivity and adjacency sound like two very arcane words that we sort of pull out from the dictionary. But a very important dimension of what we're talking about here today is actually that the United Nations negotiations about a legal framework for the high seas, for the international seas, namely the so-called biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction negotiations, the BBNJ negotiations, in which I have been closely involved myself, have been stalled by the pandemic. So in a certain way, we have a race here, a rather terrible race, where the stalling of the BBNJ negotiations, the stalling of a ratification of a framework which would encompass many activities in the international waters, not just deep sea mining, but other things as well. This has been stalled and has, from a certain kind of conflict-oriented perspective, allowed for all kinds of actors to get active, more active, and push things through, not least vis-à-vis the Seabed Authority. And this, I think, is a very acute situation, a very challenging situation that brings us to the time frame of it all. And then again, commenting on the time needed to do the science. One of the countries I'm working with, Fiji, is always pushing for a 10-year moratorium. But Fiji relates this to the United Nations Decade of Ocean Science, saying that the Decade of Ocean Science, which runs from this year, for 10 years, can actually be a time frame for pulling out all the available resources and get the science in place before things continue. So this, in a way, these are some of the stakes. I just want to put this to the panel. Also to commend that this panel takes place here on this very day, at the tail end of what from the Pacific Islands is viewed as a very dubious, suspicious conference held in Bergen this week.
Yes.
So from that perspective, I'd just like to go full circle back to the United Nations Convention of the Law of the Sea, saying, well, the Pacific Islands countries own much of the Pacific. They actually own, as their exclusive economic zones, more than 20% of the entire ocean of the world. So from that perspective, whatever happens out in the Clarion Clipperton Zone has direct consequences from what happens in the exclusive economic zones of the Pacific Islands. And that is part of the stakeholder situation. So thank you for all this rich information and for this dialogue on a Saturday. And let's cross our fingers.
You can respond, yes, Siri.
Yeah, great, thanks. Thank you for that. I mean, you point to a lot of important aspects there, and the governance aspect is, of course, because you have all this. That's part of the challenge with the ocean is that it doesn't have any kind of borders. There are sort of different layers of governance that crisscross. And one of the important agendas in the UN Decade for Ocean Science is to increase the level of protection of the oceans, to protect large amounts of the oceans. But of course, there are also different ways of doing this, and there are also the economic interest of the countries involved and who should pay for the precautions being made and for the moratoriums and so on. The time aspect is, of course, crucial, but there's another ticking clock, and that's the clock of time of climate change, and the need to perform this green shift, and the need to have the technology in place that we need to do that. And that's, of course, this: how do we hurry in a responsible way to solve the challenges that we do have? And I think at least the most important thing is to have as much as possible knowledge openly available for everyone to start the conversations. Yeah.
Just a quick comment there. Maybe building or inventing batteries that do not require Sorry, batteries that do not require seabed minerals could be an equally efficient way of promoting technology and saving the seabed.
Yeah, so there's a lot of different things being done at the same. I think we have a tendency as human beings to seek for the one solution. I think the solution, there are probably a lot of different solutions that needs to be balanced. Mono solutions are seldom good for the environment. So.
I just wanted to make a comment that I think we, or an aspect of some of the material we presented downstairs got missed. And Edward, I've been following your work for a long time, so thank you so much for being here today. Yeah, and which is that what links those two places, right? And that was something that you know we've been very interested in exploring, and a very direct material way is that the Norwegian Development Agency, NORAD, has been funding deep-sea mining research, quote unquote, I'm not sure exactly what kind of research, in the three countries, Nauru, Kiribati, and Tonga, who have a stake in the CCZ, but also the Cook Islands, which is going to be mining within their EEZ. And all four of these countries are literally, their mining operations are run by the metals company, which is also considered a very dubious player in the Pacific because of their past activity in relationship to the mining in Papua New Guinea around Nautilus minerals. It's some of the same people, it's some of the same money, you know, if one makes those connections. So in that sense, you know, the question that we wanted to sort of maybe didn't ask directly, but we wanted to open up was that, you know, the Norwegian government is a very transparent one. You know, we can see exactly how much money they've spent in the Pacific on these issues. But the fact that there are dubious mining companies involved, you know, in the Pacific, where Norwegian funding is going, is most people I've talked to about this did not know about it, and it does not get talked about and brought up in the media, right? So. If we zoom back to look at how that money is related to the Oil for Development project and its oil fund, by extension, it's perhaps another discussion. But this specific point in itself, I think, is something that we need to address.
Yeah, thanks for answering. Actually, it kind of wraps up what I wanted to ask, which was about social impact. And I think this is a certain social impact that we can have outside of Norway. But we had another question as well.
Yeah, it was similar. It's kind of similar, but I don't come from the scientific community. But here, the title of the talk today was "Who Owns the Ocean?" And we've been talking about private interests here driving the exploration and research, and we also see even spatial research is now being driven by private companies or private owners. And this itself, it's not just the ethics of how the research is done, but the ethics of should research be allowed by private interests itself, because research in itself, as we hope to think, or science is for the betterment of humanity and not for one or the other capitalistic investments and imperialistic interests. So this is a very interesting point as where we take an imperialistic and capitalistic interest and how they are kind of arguing that this is because we want to develop to save the world. The battery-driven industry today talks about it as eco-environmental, wherein we in Norway are pushed to buy battery-driven cars without talking about how this is impacting other environmental disasters across the globe. And we kind of feel like we are saving the world by buying Tesla cars, basically. So this is kind of the argument is when we talk about development, and we put this in an argument that it's going to save the world. And this is needed. And also the continuous argument that we as humans have to have economical growth always. how is that even acceptable? How is that even a point where, how long can we keep on looking for economical growth without looking at, we are in a limited world. Resources are limited. And if we were to live in a sustained life, then growth is not the answer. So it's just a comment, and I just want your comments on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone wants to go?
Yeah. No, you ask very big and challenging questions, of course. I think that given that we have a few very sort of hot and burning challenges that we need to solve, we need to look at where we are right now, and we need to look at who has the power and the means to do the research and the innovation that is needed to solve the challenges that we have. We need to, of course, not be naive and think that certain companies are there just to save the world and so on. Researchers, for that matter, whether publicly or private funded, can have their own agendas, which is something that calls for responsible research and innovation, ethical discussions, transparency, openness, peer reviews, and everything. But I do think that if we say that, okay, so we don't want any private actors involved in solving the challenges that we have, that we are in with even bigger problems than we are already. Yeah, that's my view.
Thank you. I see that we are running almost over time. I would just like, because we've been talking a lot about the accountability issue. So I have a last question for you, Nabil. How do you see the challenges of accountability in this context? And what are the investigatory methods that we can use and that we can contribute with?
I think I'll maybe ask Olga to start.
The challenges, I sort of already went through them, but I think, I guess the key ones is to make invisible visible, and also how to kind of make the company, so whoever survey the sites, make the data public, because it should belong to everyone. And I guess kind of as an architect, kind of push the tools we have, and the tools as an architect we have as spatial kind of practitioners. How can we then use it to bring the evidence to surface and make this evidence available to the wider public?
If I can add, totally agree. And I think one more thing that should be enforced is standards in data collection. So it's not just this company or this country will do the environmental studies. There has to be standards, and there has to be peer review, and it's not just producing some kind of data. So transparent, but also robust, solid, and standardized, so that we can compare between different areas. And so that we can also generate tools in case Deepsea Mining goes ahead, tools for monitoring in the future, so that we can have transparent systems for monitoring, and very, very quick systems where you can press the button and stop operations in case the environmental standards are not followed. And none of this has been implemented yet.
I fully agree. And just to kind of add, we spoke to many scientists, one of who working in some of the areas in Clarion Clipperton Zone, and they were able to share this data with us, but not the data from the mining areas, but the data from marine protected areas, because they don't have a right to share this data. And I fully agree about the quality of the data, but if we don't even know it, we don't even see it, we can't even assess the standards. So
And definitely. Some of these APIs, they are at the margin of the nodule area. It's not. Some of them is not even comparable.
Exactly. For example, the nodule abundance in Nordic Seas is much, much higher, and many species are attached to nodules, so you get completely different environment, probably much more dense ecological kind of distribution and variety than somewhere like on the margins of the area. So yeah.
Precisely.
I would just sort of add a term that Alan Sekula, the Marxist photographer whose work is also in the exhibition, a term that he used called counterforensics, right? Which is around this idea that well, you know, who polices the policeman? You know, when the state and the corporations that work with states, you know, are committing human rights violations and environmental destruction. This idea that, and this word then, this counterforensics, this forensics, this word then we use very much in forming forensic architecture, which was that then, you know, what role does civil society, what tools can civil society leverage to turn around that forensic scientific gaze back on the state, right? And this need not require billion-dollar scientific, you know, research projects. You know, we see this in the streets of Chicago, where people are using their mobile phones to hold police to account. And we can use satellite infrastructure to look at environmental violations on land. But I think we're almost in a new place, right? Where from the beginning we need a lot of conversation with scientists that are working in the deep ocean on these issues to say that what is counterforensics for the deep ocean, where there's no data, but yet, or severe lack of data. Sometimes that's a political move, why there's lack of data, right? But then how can we actually create that competence? Yeah.
Okay.
I'm agree with you with the growth concept, but I would like to suggest like being realistic maybe and seeing that the capitalist interests and the mining industry is a thing, and it's going on land, it's gonna go somehow offshore. Maybe to suggest a interdisciplinary approach, as we are all here, like from the technical, scientific areas or like artistic areas, maybe like offer to the mining industries and collaborate with them, not seeing them as an enemy, which I already see them, but maybe like offering them a better solution and saying like, okay, maybe we instead of like just like grabbing all or like harvesting all the seafloor, just like picking up individually, instead of going with the most efficient way, taking, I don't know, in just 2 years harvesting all this like the CCS area, taking it in 10 years, maybe like offering them solutions, it will be easier than just trying to stop them.
Yeah, I guess we have to. It's a good point, but I'm afraid we're running out of time, so we will have to.
Well, but I think it goes to being, you know, to some extent entrepreneurial. I mean, not all, you know, you could start small businesses, and you know, this is there's many other possibilities. You can start your own company.
Yeah.
Yeah, getting involved, I think, is the main thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. I'm afraid we have to end it there. Thank you so much, everybody, for participating and being here with us and discussing with us. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.